My girlfriend hooked up with a stranger at a bar while I was home with our baby, so I took the kid and left her a letterum, a 28-year-old guy, and I thought I had the perfect little family. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sound of Mia humming softly in the kitchen while our baby, little Lucas, gurgled in his crib. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with baby powder. It was messy, chaotic, but it felt like home. Mia had this laugh that could light up the dullest days, and I used to catch myself staring at her during those quiet moments, thinking, I'm lucky, really lucky. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was ours, and every little routine Lucas's first steps. Mia's bedtime stories, our silly weekend pancake breakfasts, made it feel sacred. Weekends were the best. We'd bundle Lucas in his tiny jacket, stroller in tow, and head to the park. He'd squeal at the swings. Mia would chase him across the grass, and I'd capture it all on my phone, thinking, this is exactly what life should be. Evenings were softer dim lights, the faint aroma of dinner Mia cooked. Lucas tucked in with a bedtime story, and the two of us sprawled on the couch, watching old sitcoms we both loved. I used to feel a quiet sense of pride, like, despite all the struggles, we'd built something stable and real. Of course, nothing's perfect. Mia had her late nights occasionally. She'd say she was meeting a friend, sometimes staying out later than she told me. I never thought much of it. Who am I to cage her? And sometimes she'd brush off my little suggestions about chores or plans, rolling her eyes in a way that could sting if I let it. But I did let it slide, because when I looked at her smile or the way she adored Lucas, those minor annoyances didn't matter. I started noticing little things. She'd glance at her phone a bit too often or answer messages a fraction late. A half smile flickering that didn't reach her eyes. I brushed it off, telling myself I was imagining it's stress, work, whatever. I trusted her completely. Little did I know, the cracks were forming quietly under the surface of what I thought was perfect, and I had no idea how fast everything I loved could start to unravel. I've always thought I was pretty good at reading people, but with Mia, it felt like I was suddenly blind. Over the next few weeks, the subtle things I'd brushed off started stacking up, like a quiet drumbeat I couldn't ignore. She'd text with a little too much urgency, or laugh at messages I couldn't see, ducking her phone quickly when I walked by. At first I told myself it was normal. She had friends, a social life, and maybe I was being paranoid. But the feeling of unease settled in my chest like a stone I couldn't shake. Evenings became harder. Mia would claim she was just going out for a drink with her friends, but the night would stretch later than she'd said, and the excuses started feeling rehearsed. Traffic was crazy, or you know how Sarah can be, always wants to chat forever, she'd tell me, eyes avoiding mine. I'd nod, forcing a smile, saying nothing, because I didn't want to be the controlling boyfriend, the guy who ruined the life we had with doubt. Yet each time, a whisper of suspicion tugged at me, making me notice the little things, the smell of perfume that wasn't hers lingering on her coat, the faint sound of laughter when she thought I wasn't around. Parenthood only made it more complicated. Lucas demanded constant attention, and I wanted to be patient, supportive, understanding. But I also wanted to trust Mia completely, to feel secure in what we had built together. Some nights, I caught myself staring at her as she laughed at her phone, trying to decode her expressions, reading into every tilt of her head or pause in her sentence. My mind raced through possibilities, every scenario worse than the last. But I kept forcing myself back into denial, telling myself I was imagining things. I even tried talking to her gently once, asking if everything was okay, if she was happy. Of course, babe, she said with that perfect, reassuring smile, brushing my concerns away like I was over. Her words were comforting, but they didn't match the nagging tension I felt in the air, like the calm before a storm. Deep down, I knew something had shifted, something I couldn't yet name. But I refused to let it consume me, at least. Not until that night came, the night that would change everything. That night started like any other. I was home alone with Lucas, rocking him to sleep, while Mia told me she'd be out for a quick drink with friends. The apartment smelled faintly of baby lotion and the pasta I'd cooked earlier. Soft hum of the night settling in. Lucas's eyelids drooped, and I carried him to his crib, tucking the blanket around him just right. It was one of those rare moments where everything felt peaceful, ordinary, safe. I kissed his forehead and whispered, "Daddy's right here." Little man, not knowing that by the time Mia returned, nothing would feel safe anymore. I was scrolling through my phone when a notification popped up, a photo sent from one of Mia's friends. It was MIA, laughing and leaning into a guy I didn't recognize at a dimly lit bar. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like I'd swallowed a brick. My hands shook, heart hammering against my ribs, and for a moment I couldn't even breathe. I kept staring, hoping my mind was playing tricks, that the angle, the lighting, the caption, anything could be wrong. But it wasn't. She wasn't just out for drinks. She was kissing someone else. I sank to the couch, Lucas's crib in sight, trying to steady myself. The quiet hum of the apartment suddenly felt oppressive, suffocating. I remembered how I'd stayed up late nights making sure Lucas was fed, how I'd taken on every diaper, every midnight cry, every tantrum, thinking our life was balanced, fair, shared. And here she was, betraying that trust in the simplest, cruelest way possible. Rage and heartbreak collided in my chest, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. When Mia finally walked in, I froze. She smelled a perfume that wasn't hers, laughter still lingering in her voice, casual like nothing had happened. "Hey babe, sorry I'm late," she said, leaning against the doorframe, smiling. My voice caught in my throat. "Where were you?" I finally managed, trying to keep it calm, though every fiber of me was shaking. "Oh, just at the bar with Sarah," she replied, completely nonchalant. "We just had a couple of drinks." My chest tightened. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to demand answers, but I didn't. I wanted to protect Lucas from seeing me fall apart. Instead, I nodded, swallowed my fury, and forced myself to say, "Okay, cool." Inside, I felt everything I loved slipping through my fingers, and I realized nothing would ever be the same again. That night, I knew I had to make a decision, and it would change everything. The next morning, the apartment felt heavier, like the walls themselves knew what had happened. Lucas was crawling around on the floor, his tiny hands grabbing at the carpet, babbling happily, completely oblivious to the storm brewing in my mind. I watched him and felt a pang of guilt. He had no idea that the person he relied on most for comfort had betrayed me. And maybe, in some way, him too. I wanted to scream, to call Mia out, to demand some shred of honesty, but I couldn't. Not yet, not in front of him. When Mia emerged from the bedroom, hair slightly mussed, still dressed from the night out, she greeted me with that smile she used to flash when we were happy. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said, leaning against the counter, flipping through her phone. I tried to keep my voice even. "Mia, we need to talk about last night," she sighed, tossing her phone onto the table. "Can we not? I was tired, and, honestly, it's no big deal. Just a night out with friends, no big deal." I felt my chest tighten so much I thought I might collapse. "I saw the picture, Mia. You weren't just out with friends, you were kissing him. You were with a stranger. With someone else." The words tasted bitter as I spat them out, but I had to hear her reaction. Had to know that the person I loved could even admit it. She blinked, paused, and then shrugged like it was something minor. "You're overreacting. It didn't mean anything. It's just a fun night? Okay." Her tone was almost casual, as if she'd said the weather was nice. My heart pounded, disbelief mixing with fury. How could she reduce this to something trivial? After everything we had built together, after the nights I'd stayed up with Lucas, I felt trapped in my own home, surrounded by the very life I wanted to protect, now twisted into a cage of betrayal. I wanted to shake her, to make her feel the weight of what she'd done, but all I could do was watch, seething silently. And as I carried Lucas to his high chair, spooning oatmeal into his tiny mouth, I realized the worst part wasn't just what she did, it was the calm, unapologetic way she acted like it didn't matter. That realization hit me harder than anything else, and I knew that from this moment on. Nothing about our life would ever feel safe again. The days that followed were a blur of tension and exhaustion. Lucas demanded constant attention, and every smile he gave me was both a bomb and a knife in my chest, reminding me of what I had to protect and what I was losing. Mia's behavior didn't improve. If anything, it got worse. She started staying out later, coming home with faint traces of someone else's cologne, laughing quietly to herself when I wasn't looking. Every excuse she gave sounded rehearsed, every smile forced, and I could feel the distance between us growing like a chasm I couldn't cross. I tried reasoning with her, even gently confronting her again. "Mia, I saw more than just the one night, didn't I?" I asked one evening, Voice trembling despite my attempt to stay calm. She rolled her eyes, brushing back her hair. "You're imagining things again," she said, her tone sharp. "Why are you always making a mountain out of a molehill?" I swallowed, heart pounding. The words cut deeper than I expected. Am I crazy for feeling this way? Am I the problem here? It started to feel like I was living with a stranger. The apartment, once warm and comforting, now smelled faintly of cigarettes and perfume that wasn't hers. Lucas's toys were scattered across the floor, reminders of a life that should have been ours, untouched by betrayal. I would watch Mia from across the room, pretending to focus on a diaper or a bottle. But noticing the little things, the way she glanced at her phone, the way her laughter seemed reserved for someone else, the way she avoided my eyes. Every gesture confirmed what I already knew, but she denied it so confidently, so casually, that it made me question my own sanity. One night, I found a message on her phone, a photo I wasn't meant to see. It wasn't just a stranger this time. It was him again, the guy from the bar, the same one she claimed was nothing. Smiling next to her in a selfie, their arms wrapped around each other like it was normal. My stomach dropped, the room spinning as rage and heartbreak collided inside me. I sank onto the couch, Lucas asleep in his crib nearby, and realized the betrayal wasn't a one-time mistake, it was ongoing. I felt paralyzed, unsure how to protect my child and myself, and yet knowing I had to make a choice, soon before everything I loved completely fell apart. It was that night, halfway through this nightmare, that everything shifted. I had gone to check on Lucas after a restless nap, and when I walked past Mia's room, I caught something I wasn't meant to see. Her phone was propped up on the nightstand, screen glowing, and I saw a string of messages that confirmed the worst. She hadn't just kissed a stranger that one night. She'd been seeing him repeatedly, meeting him behind my back, laughing at jokes I'd never hear, and sharing moments I wasn't invited to. My chest felt like it had been crushed under an invisible weight. I stumbled back into the living room, heart hammering, trying to steady my breath. The apartment, which had always smelled faintly of baby lotion and home-cooked meals, now felt sterile and foreign, like a stage where I was being played. I sank onto the couch, staring at Lucas, who was gnawing on a soft toy. Blissfully unaware of the betrayal festering mere rooms away, I felt rage, heartbreak, and a hollow emptiness all at once. The life I had thought was our sour little bubble of family was nothing but a fragile illusion. When Mia finally returned from running errands, her timing felt like a cruel joke. I confronted her again, voice low but trembling. "I know about him. I know you've been seeing him more than once." She froze, just for a moment, her eyes flicking down, then she shrugged, like it was nothing. "You're imagining things?" "I told you, it's not a big deal," she said, attempting casual dismissal. But the flicker of guilt in her eyes betrayed her words, and that tiny spark of honesty cut deeper than any outright confession. I realized at that moment that denial wasn't going to save a Sormy. It wasn't enough to stay and hope she'd change. My priority had to be Lucas. Protecting him became my only anchor, the only thing that mattered while everything else burned. I spent that night pacing, planning, thinking every possible way I could remove him from this toxic environment without causing more harm. Anger coursed through me, but beneath it was a cold, determined clarity. I had to act, and I had to act soon. Because every day we stayed in that house, the betrayal and deceit were embedding themselves deeper into our lives, and I knew, somehow, that what I did next would change everything forever. I spent the next few days carefully planning every step calculated to protect Lucas without tipping Mia off. I mapped out what I'd need: his favorite blankets, enough diapers and formula to last a few days, a small bag of clothes, even practiced how I'd carry him without drawing attention. Every time I glanced at her, laughing at a text or scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened, I felt a mixture of fury and despair. I kept telling myself, this isn't just about me. This is about keeping him safe from someone who clearly doesn't care about the life we built. The apartment, once a place of warmth and laughter, now felt like a cage. Even Lucas's giggles, which had always been my favorite sound, echoed differently here. A reminder that the world he saw as safe wasn't actually safe at all. I would watch Mia as she moved through our routines, feeding him, changing his clothes, smiling in ways that didn't reach her. Every interaction reminded me that I was living among lies, and the more I saw, the more determined I became. I rehearsed what I would say in a note. It needed to be clear, unambiguous, but not Chromia had to understand why I was leaving, and that my actions were about Lucas, not vengeance. I scribbled phrases, erased them, scribbled again. I can't let emotion cloud my words, I thought. He needs stability, and I have to give it to him. The act of writing the letter became almost cathartic, a small measure of control in a situation that had spiraled beyond reason. At night, I'd sit beside Lucas as he slept, stroking his hair, whispering promises I hoped he'd remember. "I'm taking care of you," I told him softly, my voice catching on the words. "I'll keep you safe, no matter what." And with every whisper, the resolve inside me solidified. I wasn't just planning a departure. I was reclaiming our lives, our dignity, and the fragile safety of my son. But I knew the moment I actually walked out that door, nothing would ever be the same. And the tension of that inevitable night pressed down on me like a storm waiting to break. The night I finally made my move, the apartment felt unnaturally quiet, like it was holding its breath. Lucas was asleep in his crib, soft snores rising and falling, his tiny chest heaving under the blankets I had tucked around him. I double-checked my bag diapers, bottles, clothes, his favorite stuffed elephant, everything packed and ready. Every step I took was deliberate, careful, like walking through a minefield. My hands shook slightly, but my mind was sharper than it had been in weeks. I had to protect him, and nothing else mattered. I placed a note on the kitchen counter, written with trembling hands but clear and firm, explaining that I was leaving to protect Lucas, that her choices had made this unavoidable, and that I hoped one day she'd understand. It wasn't angry, not spiteful. I wanted her to know she had lost the life we built together, but I also wanted her to know that my focus wasn't revenge. It was safety, it was love, it was responsibility. The hardest part was picking Lucas up. He stirred slightly in my arms, eyes half open, and I whispered, "It's okay, little man. Daddy's here. Everything's going to be okay." He yawned and snuggled against me, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of guilt. I would miss Mia, despite everything, because I had loved her, truly. But I knew love wasn't enough when trust was broken so completely. Every corridor, every doorway I passed, felt charged with tension. I could imagine Mia waking up, finding the note, panic blooming in her chest. But I forced myself not to look back, not to second-guess my decision. Outside, the night air was cool, the streets empty except for the distant hum of passing cars. I kept Lucas close, feeling the rhythm of his tiny heart against mine. And with every step away from that apartment, a mixture of fear, relief, and determination surged through me. I didn't know what awaited us on the other side of this night, but one thing was clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. The first hours after leaving felt surreal, like I was moving through someone else's life. Lucas was curled against me in the backseat of my car, soft breaths even, oblivious to the storm we had just escaped. The city lights blurred past the windshield, casting fleeting shadows across his tiny face, and I felt a mix of relief and panic. Relief that he was safe away from someone who couldn't put him first. Panic because I had no plan beyond keeping him alive and away from that apartment, away from Mia's reckless choices. I found a small motel on the outskirts of town, quiet and unassuming. As I checked in, I kept glancing at Lucas, making sure he was settled. Every little sound, the rustle of sheets, the hum of the air conditioner. His tiny size was magnified in the silence around us. I sat beside him on the bed, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead, and for the first time in days, allowed myself to just breathe. But even in this temporary haven, my mind wouldn't stop racing. What would Mia do when she found the note? Would she try to track us down? Could I keep him safe if she came? Exhaustion hit me like a freight train, but sleep didn't come. I sat at the edge of the bed, head in my hands, replaying the last weeks in my mind. The laughter, the small betrayals, the pictures, the lies. Everything culminated in that night, and now, with Lucas beside me, I felt the weight of the choices I'd made. I was free in one sense, but trapped in another, emotionally exhausted, unsure of what the next step was. I'd done the right thing, but the guilt and heartbreak made it feel unbearably heavy. As the hours passed, I realized this wasn't just a temporary escape. This was the beginning of a new life for Lucas and me, one that wouldn't include the woman who had broken our trust so fundamentally. Yet, even as I reassured myself, a knot formed in my stomach. I loved him, I protected him, But the road ahead was uncertain, and every step carried the tension of the unknown. Somewhere out there, Mia would find the note, and the confrontation was inevitable, but I had to survive this first night. For him, for us, and for the fragile hope of a life free from betrayal. The next morning, the motel room felt quieter than I expected, almost unnervingly so. Lucas was playing with a rattle on the bed, his laughter echoing softly against the plain walls, a stark contrast to the turmoil swirling in my mind. I had expected panic, calls, messages from Mia, maybe even someone knocking on the door, but there was nothing. The silence was deafening, forcing me to confront the gravity of what I had done. I had left everything behind: our apartment, our life together, and now it was just him and me, strangers in a temporary sanctuary. I had left the note on the kitchen counter, hoping my words were clear enough that this wasn't about revenge, that I was acting out of love and responsibility. And yet, the absence of immediate confrontation didn't make the pain any easier to bear. I knew Mia would discover it eventually, and when she did, her shock, anger, or guilt would hit like a wave I couldn't control. I imagined her pacing the apartment, reading my words, realizing the weight of her actions, and a strange satisfaction mixed with dread filled me. She needed to feel the consequences, but I feared what that would bring. I tried to focus on Lucas, making breakfast, feeding him, and keeping routines as normal as possible. His little hands grabbing for my fork, his innocent chatter. His tiny victories crawling across the floor, they became my lifeline. Each laugh, each smile, reminded me why I had done this, why leaving was not just necessary, but urgent. And yet, underneath it all, a knot of fear remained. Fear that Mia might find a way to reclaim control. Fear for the uncertainty of our new life. By midday, my phone finally buzzed. A message from Mia. I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I watched Lucas stack his blocks, feeling a mix of dread and determination. Whatever she was planning, whatever she was feeling, I couldn't let it disrupt our fragile new beginning. I took a deep breath, kissed the top of Lucas's head, and whispered to myself, "We'll be okay. We'll make it through this." But even as I said it, I knew the real test, the confrontation. The reckoning was still ahead, and I had no choice but to brace for it. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope over an endless void. Lucas and I settled into a quiet rhythm, small routines that kept our tiny world stable. Morning oatmeal, diaper changes, park walks, bedtime stories. Every little laugh, every shy smile reminded me why I had made the impossible choice to leave. But the weight of guilt never fully lifted. I worried about the day Mia would come looking, or the moment someone might recognize us. The fear was constant, a low hum under the surface of everything I did. I started thinking about the long term, about how to rebuild our lives beyond the motel. Calls to friends and family became cautious, coded, designed to protect both Lucas and me. I researched legal advice in secret, making sure I understood custody rights and the steps I could take to secure a future where my son would be safe. It was exhausting, mentally and emotionally, but I had no choice. Every sleepless night, every pang of anxiety reminded me that this wasn't just about leaving, it was about creating a life where betrayal and recklessness couldn't touch us. Again, there were moments when I allowed myself to grieve not just for Mia, but for the life I had imagined with her, the weekends in the park, the cozy nights on the couch, the tiny victories of our shared parenthood. They were gone, stolen in an instant by her choices. I felt anger, yes, but also a surprising clarity. The life I had envisioned was never real if it required turning a blind eye to her behavior. And with that clarity came empowerment, a sense that I could finally make decisions entirely for Lucas and myself. Without compromise, one night, as Lucas slept, I wrote another letter not for Mia, but for me. A promise to protect him, to honor the love I had for him without letting betrayal define our lives. I read it aloud quietly, feeling a strange sense of peace, the first in weeks. And even though I knew the confrontation with Mia would come eventually, I felt ready, because, for the first time, I understood something crucial. The power wasn't hers to take. It had always been mine, and now I was choosing to wield it for us, for our future, and for the life we deserved. The storm was still out there, but for the first time, I felt like I could weather it. The day Mia finally discovered the note and the empty apartment, I felt a strange mix of relief and anticipation. I imagined her panic as she read my words, the slow realization that the life she had taken for granted was gone. Part of me wanted to see her face, to hear the shock and guilt. But another part knew that engagement would only risk Lucas's safety and the fragile peace we had built. I had chosen silence, distance, and control, and that alone gave me a sense of quiet victory. Lucas and I were already on the move, new routines, new spaces, small victories that reminded me we were alive and safe. Every morning I watched him explore the world with wonder, untouched by betrayal, his trust in me absolute. And that trust was sacred. I could rebuild, reimagine, and reclaim our lives without dragging the weight of Mia's selfishness into our home. I felt empowered, a mix of sadness for what was lost and fierce pride for what I had protected. Mia's messages and calls grew fewer, her desperation giving way to resignation, and I didn't respond. The confrontation I had imagined never fully came. She realized too late that her choices had consequences she couldn't undo. Lucas thrived in our small, steady world. Each laugh, each milestone, a reminder that love and responsibility could overcome even the deepest betrayal. I didn't feel anger anymore, just clarity, and a profound sense of peace that came from making the hardest decision of my life. Looking back, I realized that night of betrayal didn't just break me, it reshaped me. It forced me to protect what mattered most and to reclaim the narrative of our lives. I learned that true strength isn't about revenge or punishment, it's about courage, clarity, and unwavering commitment to those you love. And as I watch Lucas sleep beside me now, safe, loved, and oblivious to the chaos behind us, I know that leaving Mia was not just an act of survival, it was an act of profound, quiet justice. Our lives are finally ours again, built on trust, love, and the hard-earned knowledge that some betrayals, no matter how deep, can be overcome with courage and resolve.